Of all the ways our bodies can betray us, few are as terrifying as diabetes. The disease strikes some when they are young, others when they grow old. All who suffer are consumed with a terrible hunger and thirst, but no amount of food or drink will help. The diabetic's body cannot absorb what it takes in. Slowly, the victim slips into a deadly coma that doctors are powerless to halt. No one can explain this breakdown of the body's internal chemistry, but it's reasoned that if diabetics cannot tolerate food, perhaps they can survive by eating less. The leading proponent of this theory is Dr. Frederick Allen, an uncompromising man who demands that his patients lose at least 30% of their body weight.
Dr. Allen's undernutrition approach, promptly dubbed the starvation approach to diabetes, led to a ghastly kind of therapy in which people who were already complaining that they couldn't get enough food and drink had to do with less, and in fact had to gradually starve to death. And there are terrible stories of diabetic patients stealing hot food from ovens, burning their hands to do it, eating toothpaste and birdseed left in their rooms. But if you starved yourself carefully, you could buy another year or two of life. But it was not a very satisfactory life.
Only the strong-willed can survive the Allen diet. Elizabeth Hughes, the 11-year-old daughter of a Supreme Court justice, has already lost 20 pounds. Barely clinging to life, Elizabeth and her parents can only pray for a scientific breakthrough to save her. A glimmer of hope comes when researchers discover that a gland in the abdomen called the pancreas plays an important role in the disease. The gland appears to have two major functions. It produces enzymes that travel through ducts and into the small intestine to help in the digestion of food. And it produces another, internal secretion. That is absorbed into the bloodstream to help regulate the metabolism of sugars and other carbohydrates. Because diabetics have a high level of sugar in their blood, scientists wonder if their disease is being triggered by the gland's failure to produce this internal secretion. Almost immediately, attempts are made to isolate this substance in hopes of curing the disease. But by 1920, no one has succeeded. Then a young Canadian surgeon named Frederick Banting stumbles across an article about the relationship between diabetes and the pancreas, which gives him an idea. He goes to Toronto University and meets with an internationally known expert on the metabolism of carbohydrates, J.J. McLeod. Although Banting has no background for this type of research, he proposes a new approach to the problem. Banting's idea is to tie off the pancreatic ducts leading to the small intestines, so the cells making the digestive juices will atrophy and die. Then, only the pancreas's internal secretion will be actively produced, making it easier to isolate. Intrigued, McLeod agrees to give Banting 10 dogs to experiment on, a tiny lab, the services of a research assistant, Charles Best, and a few months to work on the problem. The eager young scientists begin operating on the dogs, with disastrous results.
You have to imagine working in a laboratory in sweltering weather without air conditioning. Imagine a couple of enthusiastic young researchers trying to operate on dogs, the sweat pouring off their bodies, dripping into the wounds of the dogs becoming infected and dying at a faster rate than they ever dreamed of. Banting and Best being so worried that they were killing so many dogs that they went out on the streets of Toronto and bought extra dogs and slipped them into the lab surreptitiously. Almost everything that could go wrong did go wrong. There were times when they were ready to quit.
Finally, after weeks of fumbling, Banting and Best managed to make an extract they hope will contain the internal secretion. They inject it into the dogs, whose pancreases have been removed and who are now severely diabetic. It will be hours before the researchers will know if the injection has lowered the dog's high level of blood sugar. When they measure the level again, it's gone down dramatically. A sign that the extract is working. The pair is convinced it's a breakthrough. An ecstatic Banting awaits McLeod's return from his summer holiday to share the results and ask for additional support.
He wanted better facilities. He wanted more dogs, more assistance. He also wanted some money because he was working for nothing and was broke. Wanted his research to have the highest priority in J.J.R. McLeod's lab. McLeod was not prepared to do this because the results were not yet at anything like that level of credibility. So Banting and McLeod at the end of the summer of 1921 had a terrible confrontation, with Banting finally saying to McLeod, "Dr. McLeod, we will see if the University of Toronto appreciates the importance of my research." McLeod saying, "Dr. Banting, as far as you are concerned, I am the University of Toronto." Best remembered Banting coming out of the meeting practically frothing at the mouth, saying, "I'll show the little son of a bitch that he is not the University of Toronto."
McLeod wants to know how long a diabetic dog can survive on Banting's extract, to see if it's effective over time. But to carry out the new experiment, Banting and Best will need far more of the internal secretion than they presently have. In a desperate move, Banting grinds up pancreases obtained from the local slaughterhouse and tries to isolate the internal secretion by cooling and separating it with alcohol solvents. Surprisingly, this simple method gives him the supply of extracts he needs. The exhausting months of tying off pancreatic ducts had been totally unnecessary. The researchers are now ready to begin the longevity experiment with diabetic dog 27 and dog 33. Both animals are given 2 daily injections. 11 days later, dog 27 goes into shock and dies. Instead of prolonging the dog's life, the extract has mysteriously killed it. But dog 33 is alive and well even after 70 days of injections. Theorizing that dog 27 was killed by impure extract, McLeod suggests bringing biochemist J.B. Collop onto the team. The experienced Collop quickly improves the quality of the extract. He writes in his diary, "We have obtained from the pancreas of animals a mysterious something which, when injected into totally diabetic dogs, completely removes all the cardinal symptoms of the disease. If the substance works on humans, it will be a great boon to medicine." Collop's mysterious something is the internal secretion of the pancreas, a hormone that the team names insulin. On January 11th, without Collop's knowledge, Banting prepares his own version of the extract. It will be given to a 14-year-old diabetic boy named Leonard Thompson. Banting hopes the injection will lower the boy's high level of blood sugar. But when it fails to work and causes a reaction, the experiment is halted.
What a discouragement. What a discouragement. The extract had always been loaded with toxic contaminants. And even on the dogs, the effect had been very erratic. Sometimes you had good stuff, sometimes it didn't work. It was just so full of impurities that it was really a kind of hit and miss scattergun approach, maybe hitting a few more times than missing, but in fact it missed in the first clinical test.
On January 23rd, Leonard Thompson is given a new extract, prepared by Collip. This time it works. The boy becomes more alert, looks better, and says he feels stronger. It's the first successful use of insulin on a human diabetic.
Amazingly, sadly, the great breakthrough on Leonard Thompson was followed by the utter breakdown of relations of the research team, as Collip went to Banting and Best in the lab and said, "I've done it, I know how to do it." Banting said, "How did you do it?" Collip said, "I'm not going to tell you." Whereupon Banting grabbed Collip and tried to throttle him. It was close to a fist fight in the lab. How could this happen? How could researchers on the brink of a great discovery like this, a discovery that really is of global importance, how could they turn into wrestling children? Somebody had talked about patenting the discovery. And as often in science, teamwork, cooperation is all very good until immortality, glory, and dollars start to intrude.
After the breakthrough with Leonard Thompson, Collip is put in charge of making the extract in larger quantities. But this time, his new methods fail. He goes back to his old laboratory procedures, and they don't work either. He had blended and filtered, concentrated and diluted, distilled and evaporated, never making the same batch of extract twice. And now, he has trouble recalling what he has done. As the first store of insulin runs out, the team is besieged by dying patients. They put aside their differences and work together in the lab. 3 months and countless combinations later, they regain the ability to make insulin, but still only in small quantities. Desperate for help, they forge an alliance with Eli Lilly, a large American pharmaceutical firm. Lilly's chemists soon solve the problems of mass production. Finally, there is enough insulin for everyone. The impact on diabetics is immediate and extraordinary. One doctor, stunned by the resurrection of his patients, evokes the biblical story of Ezekiel. "I will bring flesh upon you, put breath in you, and you shall live." He calls it Banting's chapter of the Bible. The first child Banting brings back from a deadly coma is Elsie Needham. 4 months later, she seems like a healthy, normal girl with years of life ahead of her. Yet of all Banting's grateful patients, his most memorable is Elizabeth Hughes, who had barely clung to life. "You'd think it was a fairy tale," she writes her mother. I look entirely different, gaining every hour in strength and weight. Oh, it is simply too wonderful for words. In Boston, Dr. Elliot Joslin is one of the first American specialists to be supplied with insulin. He endorses it as one of the greatest discoveries of the century, the beginning of a new epoch in medicine. But eventually, he and his staff realized that the drug is not as miraculous as they had hoped.
In the beginning, after the discovery of insulin, its use was widely misunderstood. Everyone thought this was a cure, and why not? Of course, what was not known was that people were alive, but not necessarily cured. It was not until, the 1940s, there was a great age of disillusionment, because they then discovered that although the people lived, and lived really normal lives, they were developing eye complications, kidney complications, nerve complications. Simply to give insulin was not good enough. It had to be precisely the right amount, such as your body does in normal circumstances.
Joslin is among the first to realize that insulin has transformed diabetes from a fatal disease to a chronic one. He warns that the era of coma and death has given way to the era of complications. He teaches his patients that the disease can only be held at bay by strict diet, constant testing, and a rigid schedule of injections. But there's no mistaking the elation that although diabetes cannot be cured, it can at least be tamed.
The effect of insulin was to show in a very dramatic way that doctors really could be effective, that they could treat a dreadful disease in a relatively simple and inexpensive way, and that science now really made a difference. And this gave not just doctors more confidence in what they were doing, but it gave patients a greater confidence in what medicine could do for them. And it immeasurably boosted the image of medicine in the eyes of the public.